It has been over a week since Ukraine launched the long-awaited counteroffensive. However, faced with stronger resistance from the Russian forces than anticipated, Kyiv appears to be struggling and suffering heavy losses. What exactly has happened? The new phase of the conflict has commenced, and the initial moves from both sides unfolded. Who currently holds the upper hand? In the opening of the counteroffensive, Ukraine's most battle-hardened unit has lost almost all of the Bradley fighting vehicles provided by the United States. However, they assert their rising anger and determination to retaliate against the Russian forces. Meanwhile, the Kyiv military commander stated they are forging iron in the fire and remain resolute despite the daunting challenges they face. On the other hand, the Russian forces have significantly strengthened following their setbacks in Kherson and Kharkiv. What formidable capabilities do they possess to construct a steel wall and thwart numerous enemy advances? All of these questions will be answered in today's World Affairs. Ukraine's counteroffensive is just a few days old, but its shape is gradually becoming clearer. According to The Economist, there are three major points of offensive. One axis points east at the area around the bloodily contested town of Bakhmut and in Luhansk province. Another aims south and southeast from Vuhledar in Donetsk province. The third is perhaps the most important. On June the 8th, it became apparent that Ukraine had launched a major southward assault in Zaporizhia province, which forms the central part of the war's long front line. It looks like the biggest one yet. Although the attack began earlier overnight on June 8th, Ukrainian troops advanced into Bronx from Kyiv, a small Ukrainian-held town, according to a source familiar with the course of fighting. One advance hugged the Konka River, a tributary of the Dnieper that snakes east of the town. The other occurred further east. Russian military bloggers on Telegram, a messaging platform, described a fierce assault with heavy artillery bombardment and the use of tanks. Russia's defense ministry claimed to have repelled an attack in Novodarivka, which lies almost 70 kilometers east of Kharkiv. On June 8th, Yevgeny Balitsky, the leader of Russia's puppet government in the occupied part of Zaporizhia, ordered residents in Tokmak and a pair of towns on either side, Vasyslivka and Polony, to evacuate to Simferopol in Crimea. There was reportedly heavy fighting around the area. There are some early signs that the attack in Zaporizhia differs from those in the east and south. One is the scale and intensity of the Ukrainian assault. Another is the equipment that is being used. Drone images published by Russian media appear to show German Leopard tanks, including the most advanced 2A6 variants, American Bradley armored fighting vehicles, and M113 armored personnel carriers in Mala Tomaka, a village to the east of Kharkiv. That would suggest that Ukraine has committed several of its 9 Western armed and trained brigades, including some of the best equipped ones, according to leaked Pentagon documents from February in the area. Full frontal fighting along the Kharkiv-Tomak axis, there has been hard going, a military source conceded, with Ukraine taking significant losses of armor and personnel. More than dozens of soldiers had fallen, he said. Ukraine had attacked using its well-equipped 47th Brigade, but has struggled to cope with Russia's traditional strengths in building fortifications and electronic warfare, a source in Ukraine's military intelligence added. A group of Bradley fighting vehicles backed by German-made Leopard tanks came under fire on Thursday as Ukraine's 47th Brigade launched an offensive southeast of Zaporizhia, part of a fresh bid to claw back some territory from Russia. It seems that Kyiv's intelligence has underestimated the strength of the enemy, resulting in significant losses of the limited number of formidable combat vehicles provided by the United States. A group of Ukrainian soldiers taking a break from the fighting just outside the small town of Orikhiv in the southern region of Zaporizhia told AFP they had lost most of their Bradleys. Drone footage of the ambush shared on Russian propaganda channels showed several vehicles hit. Battalion 47 is equipped with 10 Bradley vehicles. After several different battles, currently 6 of them are damaged. 3 others are broken and hopeful for repairs, and only 1 remains intact, the soldiers informed AFP. The group said Russian forces had been forewarned, having taunted the Ukrainians the night before the battle over their radios, and they suspected someone had leaked information. Asked whether they had captured any ground despite coming under such heavy fire, one of the soldiers held up his finger and thumb in a gesture to indicate very small progress. When our Bradleys are repaired, we'll be right back at them, another said. Who would be happy receiving those orders? Go and take those Russian positions, which are well protected, a senior officer who asked not to be identified said. But we still have that fury, with no choice but to succeed. Russian President Vladimir Putin affirmed on June 9th that Ukraine had initiated a counteroffensive, evidenced by the deployment of strategic reserve forces. The Kremlin leader further stated that the counteroffensive efforts had thus far failed. On June 10th, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the Ukrainian military had lost 9 tanks in over 24 hours in the southern part of the Donetsk region and in Zaporizhia. This includes 4 main battle tanks of the Leopard type. Additionally, 11 infantry fighting vehicles, including Bradley vehicles, were destroyed by Russia, primarily in Zaporizhia. Military experts and officials had long thought that Zaporizhia was a logical place for Ukraine to focus its offensive. Its position at the heart of the front line means that any attack there could trap large numbers of Russian troops in a pocket to the west, in Kherson province. Many could also be trapped in Crimea itself if Ukraine managed to strike the bridge over the Kerch Strait again. If Ukraine could get to the key city of Melitopol, it could strike at Russian road and rail supply lines running westwards to Crimea, in a sense severing the so-called land bridge that connects Russian territory to the occupied peninsula. Just getting to within artillery range of the links would also cause big problems for Russia. For the same reason, Russia has assiduously built multiple lines of defense in Zaporizhia north of Tokmak, stretching back 30 kilometers, drone and satellite imagery shows. These include trenches, shelters, anti-tank ditches and obstacles, and minefields. Tokmak itself is entirely surrounded by circular ditches that can house anti-tank teams and multiple strong points, notes Pasi Paroinen, a Finnish Reserve Army officer who analyzes such imagery. The point of such defenses is not to halt an attack, but to channel it into certain areas and slow it down so it can be struck and broken up. War games conducted by Ukraine's allies last year and more recently showed that any advance on Melitopol could be difficult and costly. Ukraine's flanks would be exposed to Russian attacks, and Russia's air force could use long-range glide bombs to attack advancing columns. Ukraine's progress is unclear. Some open-source analysts sound gloomy. The attack is going rather slowly, says Emil Kastehelmi, a Finnish analyst. At the moment, it doesn't seem very good for the Ukrainians. One image shows Leopard tanks being struck by mines and artillery after driving single file down a narrow road, a questionable tactic that ravaged Russian armor last year. Even so, Western officials remain sanguine. It has all gone according to plan on that axis, insists one. Things are okay, says a Ukrainian military source, but really hard going. We needed more artillery systems and strike drones for the offensive to go as we would have liked. The role of aviation, where Russia enjoys a clear advantage on paper, is key. More of it is now being used in the Zaporizhia sector than has been deployed at any time since the opening stages of the war. But Ukrainian sources suggest that Russian pilots remain risk-averse and fearful of Ukrainian air defenses. These have been bolstered by mobile Western guns like the Chibard, as well as recommissioned Pantsir missile systems abandoned by the Russians during Ukraine's counteroffensive in the Kyiv region in the autumn. Michael Kaufman of CNA, a think tank, counsels patience. It is too early to judge the operation as much of the fighting has only reached Russia's initial lines. The indications are that Ukrainian forces have made gains digging into Russian lines, but also that the fighting is heavy, resulting in losses few expected otherwise. The key question is whether the offensive will look more like Kherson or Kyiv. Last year's Ukrainian assault directed at Kherson city was a slow, grinding, and attritional contest, with sticky front lines giving way only after months of inconclusive battle. By contrast, the assault in Kyiv quickly punched through a weak point in Russian lines, with Ukrainian units moving forward more quickly than Russian defenders could regroup. The result was a rout. The Russian lines are now far denser and better protected than they were in Kyiv, with much higher caliber soldiers. But Ukraine's army is better equipped and trained. Its initial attacks in Zaporizhia may be intended to force Russia to send its scant reserves into the second and third echelon of defenses, to man trenches, for instance, creating gaps elsewhere. Nor can Russia afford simply to divert all its troops to the south. That is because Ukrainian attacks in the east have also stepped up, with Alexander Sisky, Ukraine's army commander, attempting a pincer movement in Bakhmut. On June 11th, its 68th Brigade reported that it had liberated battle-hardened, a village in Donetsk province, 10 kilometers inside Russian-occupied territory. Russian military bloggers suggested that the raid had gone much deeper still and taken in other nearby villages. There was some progress made near Bakhmut further northeast too, with Ukrainians advancing to encircle the devastated town that has been the only real focus of Russia's offensive efforts for the past year. Where Russian forces are pushing harder is with drones, from reconnaissance to strike drones. Denis Yarovlavsky, a special forces officer now fighting in a village north of Bakhmut, reports a massive increase in the use of such devices in that theater. Apart from Landjet strike drones capable of destroying tanks and artillery systems, Russian forces have acquired significant numbers of Chinese drones, he says. Mr. Yarovlavsky is confident that Ukraine will continue to close the circle around Bakhmut. It's hard going, but we are moving constantly. Within a week, we will have the high ground and Bakhmut in the palm of our hands. Serhiy Cherevati, the spokesman for Ukraine's Eastern Group of Forces, said Ukrainian troops were advancing by anything from several hundred meters to 2 kilometers a day, a far higher rate of advance than that of Russia over the past year. A breakthrough in Bakhmut would certainly be an embarrassment for Russia, which has invested heavily in taking the town. But what Ukraine intends to do from there is unclear. Russian lines there are well manned, say officials, but with subpar troops. Elsewhere, the flooding caused by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam on June 6th has caused not only a humanitarian disaster on both Ukrainian and Russian-held sides of the Dnieper River, but also significant disruption to Russia's defensive positions in the area. Journalists were asked to leave the area on June 8th as artillery duels grew more intense. As the waters recede, Ukraine might find it easier to cross the river into eastern Kherson. The destruction of the bridge alongside the dam has almost certainly put an end to any crossing of heavy weaponry. That said, Ukrainian military sources hint at a different type of operation. The conditions are arguably better for a limited assault using speedboats and special forces, one said. Ukraine's generals are keeping many irons in the fire, and this operation is still in its very early stages. We haven't committed our main forces, and the Russians haven't committed their main forces, said a source in Ukraine's general staff. Both were involved in a chess game to throw out each other's reserves, he said. Ukraine's immediate priority is reducing Russian superiority in artillery by targeting its systems with long-range fire. Andriy Zagorodnyuk, a former defense minister, says that Ukraine's military leaders are probably keeping things ambiguous on purpose. Eventually, the counteroffensive will become more focused, but the early approach might be more opportunistic and scattered, he said. Nature could also play a part. Rain is predicted for much of the next week, which could stall some of Ukraine's advances, while also making Russian air operations and reconnaissance more difficult. Ukraine will only go as fast as the conditions allow, an intelligence source said. We need to hurry, but slowly. Ukrainian troops are probing Russian defenses as spring gives way to a second summer of fighting, and Kyiv forces are facing an enemy that has made mistakes and suffered setbacks in the 15-month-old war. But analysts say Moscow also has learned from those blunders and improved its weapons and skills. Russia has built heavily fortified defenses along the 1,000-kilometer front line, honed its electronic weapons to reduce Ukraine's edge in combat drones, and turned heavy bombs from its massive Cold War-era arsenal into precision-guided gliding munitions capable of striking targets without putting its warplanes at risk. The changing Russian tactics, along with increased troop numbers and improved weaponry, could make it challenging for Ukraine to score any kind of quick, decisive victory, threatening to turn it into a long battle of attrition. U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley said in an interview with the Associated Press on Tuesday that while Ukraine's military is well prepared as time goes on, this will be a back-and-forth fight for a considerable length of time. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Saturday that counteroffensive and defensive actions are underway against Russian forces, asserting that his commanders are in a positive mindset about its success. Ukrainian authorities have stopped short of announcing the start of a full-blown counteroffensive. A day earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that it had begun, but that Ukraine failed to make any headway and suffered significant losses. Sir Richard Barons, a retired general who led the UK Joint Forces Command, said the Russian military has built textbook defensive lines and adjusted its tactics following its hasty retreat from wide swaths of the Kyiv and Kherson regions last fall under the brunt of a swift Ukrainian campaign. He pointed at the improved Russian ability to both counter and use drones, and also noted that Moscow has learned to keep key assets like command headquarters and ammunition dumps out of artillery range. And they have sharpened up how they can fire at Ukrainian artillery and tanks when they spot them, he told AP. So if you add all that all together, everybody knows this will be a harder fight than for Kherson or Kyiv in the autumn of last year. Ukrainian military analyst Oleh Zdanov notes that Moscow has maintained a numerical advantage in troops and weapons, despite any weaknesses, while Russia has increasingly tapped its Cold War arsenals, deploying tanks dating to the 1950s to replenish its massive early losses. Such old weapons can still perform well, Zdanov said. It doesn't matter what tanks they have thousands of them, Zdanov told AP, noting Russia put many of them to use as stationary weapons in their defensive lines, including in the Zaporizhia region, where they proved effective. He acknowledged Russian success in hitting Ukrainian military depots, relying on Moscow's agents and collaborators. Russia has stopped using battalion-sized tactical groups it deployed early in the war and shifted to smaller units, Zdanov said. The Royal United Service Institute, a London-based think tank that focuses on defense and security issues, said Russian engineers have shown prowess in building field fortifications and complex obstacles along the front line, including concrete reinforced trenches and command bunkers, wire entanglements, ditches, anti-tank hedgehogs or dragon's teeth, and complex minefields. Extensive placement of sophisticated mines for use against tanks and infantry poses a major tactical challenge to Ukrainian offensive operations, the RUSI author said. Other Russian improvements noted in the report include better thermal camouflage for tanks, nimbler deployment of artillery into multiple positions, including integration with drones to avoid losses, and attacking Ukrainian artillery with loitering munitions, drones that hover until they acquire a target. Such responsive Russian fire represents the greatest challenge to Ukrainian offensive operations, the RUSI report said. Improved Russian electronic warfare systems have destroyed about 10,000 Ukrainian drones a month, while they also have been able to intercept and decrypt Ukrainian tactical communications in real time, it added. They also have learned to intercept GPS-guided rockets fired by Western-supplied launchers like the US-made HIMARS, which embarrassed the Russians and inflicted major damage, the report said. Russia's military is able to improve and evolve its employment of key systems, RUSI said, but noted it could struggle to respond to similar quick adjustments by Kyiv that could make Moscow's units likely to rapidly lose their coordination. Ukraine's summer counteroffensive is currently clashing with the incredibly resilient steel wall of Russia. The situation may undergo significant changes in the coming period, and we will continuously update in upcoming programs. For now, thank you for your attention, and goodbye.